Thunder rumbled across the vast Wyoming sky as Katherine Grace struggled against the rough ropes binding her wrists to the weathered wooden post outside Hillsboro's town limits. Rain pelted her face, mixing with desperate tears as lightning illuminated the darkening prairie around her. The year was 1877, and Katherine had never imagined her journey west would end like this, abandoned to the elements by men who believed her guilty of a crime she didn't commit. The accusation had been theft, a missing brooch belonging to the banker's wife, but Katherine knew it was her rejection of Sheriff Harmon's unwanted advances that had truly condemned her. With no family to defend her and new to town, she'd been an easy target for the corrupt lawman's vindictive justice. "I'm innocent," she shouted into the howling wind, her voice drowned by another explosive crack of thunder that seemed to split the sky in two. Her once fine blue dress now clung to her shivering body, soaked through and spattered with mud. Katherine had arrived in Hillsboro just 3 weeks prior, hoping to start anew as a schoolteacher after leaving behind a life of comfortable predictability in Boston. At 23, she'd yearned for independence and adventure, not this nightmare of injustice. The storm intensified, and Katherine's strength began to fade. Her honey blonde hair, once neatly pinned, now hung in sodden ropes around her face. Hope dwindled with each passing minute as the temperature dropped and her fingers grew numb. Then, through the curtain of rain, she spotted movement, a rider approaching from the west. At first, she feared it might be the sheriff returning, perhaps with more accusations. But as the figure drew closer, she realized this was a stranger, a tall man on a powerful chestnut stallion, his face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. Xavier O'Malley had been riding hard for 2 days, pushing through the storm to reach his brother's ranch outside Hillsboro. After 3 years driving cattle across the territories, he was ready for something more permanent. His brother's offer to partner on the ranch had come at the right time. Xavier hadn't expected to encounter anything more dramatic than the storm itself on the final stretch of his journey, until he spotted what appeared to be a human form tied to a post in the distance. Pulling his horse to a stop, Xavier narrowed his eyes through the downpour. "What in God's name?" he muttered, guiding his mount closer. The sight that greeted him sent a surge of anger through his weary body. A woman, young and clearly terrified, bound to a post in the midst of one of the worst spring storms he'd witnessed in years. "Hold on," he called out, dismounting in one fluid motion and splashing through the mud toward her. Katherine's head snapped up at the deep voice that somehow carried above the storm. Relief and fear warred within her as the tall stranger approached. His face came into focus, strong-jawed and weathered from sun and wind, with piercing blue eyes that assessed her situation quickly. "Who did this to you?" he demanded, already drawing a knife from his boot. "Sheriff Harmon," Katherine managed through chattering teeth. "He says I stole from Mrs. Billings, but I swear I didn't." Xavier's expression darkened as he sliced through the ropes. "Leaving anyone out in this storm is a death sentence, guilty or not." As the last rope fell away, Katherine's legs buckled beneath her and he caught her against his chest. "I've got you, madam." Her wrists were raw and bleeding from the ropes and her desperate struggles. Without hesitation, Xavier removed his duster and wrapped it around her trembling shoulders before lifting her onto his horse. "My brother's ranch is about an hour's ride from here," he explained, mounting behind her and pulling her securely against his chest. "We need to get you warmed up and tended to. I'm Xavier O'Malley." "Katherine Grace," she replied weakly, grateful for his solid warmth at her back as they rode away from the post that had nearly become her execution site. The journey to the O'Malley ranch was a blur of thunder, rain, and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats beneath them. Katherine drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of the strong arms that kept her from falling and the occasional reassurances murmured into her ear. By the time they arrived at the modest but well-built ranch house, night had fully descended. A warm glow emanated from the windows, and as they approached, the front door swung open to reveal a broad-shouldered man with the same striking blue eyes as Xavier. "Good Lord, Xav, what have you gotten yourself into now?" the man called out, rushing to help as Xavier carefully dismounted with Katherine. "James, this is Miss Katherine Grace. Found her tied to a post outside town in the storm. Sheriff's work, apparently," Xavier explained grimly. James O'Malley's face hardened as he ushered them inside. "Harmon's always been trouble. Bring her in, Sarah," he called toward the back of the house. "We need you." A petite woman with kind eyes and auburn hair hurried into the main room, gasping at the sight of Katherine's bedraggled state. "Get her by the fire," she ordered, already moving to gather blankets and supplies. Within minutes, Katherine found herself seated before a roaring hearth, wrapped in dry blankets while Sarah O'Malley, James's wife, gently tended to her raw wrists. "You're safe now," Sarah assured her, applying a soothing salve to the abrasions. "No one will harm you here." Xavier stood nearby, having shed his wet coat and hat. In the warm glow of the firelight, Katherine could see him clearly for the first time. He was taller than she'd initially thought, with broad shoulders that tapered to a lean waist. His face, though weathered from years under the western sun, was handsome in a rugged way, with those penetrating blue eyes that seemed to see straight through pretense. His dark hair, damp from the rain, curled slightly at his collar. "Why would Harmon do this?" James asked, pouring cups of hot coffee for everyone. Katherine accepted the steaming mug with grateful hands. "He made advances that I refused, then Mrs. Billings's brooch went missing and he was quick to accuse me. No one questioned him. I'm still new in town and he's the law." Xavier's jaw tightened. "That's no law I recognize." "You said you're new to Hillsborough," Sarah asked gently. Katherine nodded. "I arrived 3 weeks ago from Boston to take the teaching position at the school. I was staying at Mrs. Porter's boarding house until—" She trailed off, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization that she had nowhere to go. Her small savings would not last long, and after today's events, her reputation in town would be ruined. As if reading her thoughts, Sarah exchanged a glance with her husband before saying, "You'll stay here with us until this is sorted out." "I couldn't impose," Katherine began. "It's not an imposition," James interrupted firmly. "Besides, Xav here just arrived to help with the ranch. Having another pair of hands around the house would be a blessing. Sarah's been trying to manage everything since our housekeeper left to get married last month." Xavier, who had been watching Katherine with an intensity that made her both nervous and oddly comforted, nodded in agreement. "You'd be doing us a favor, Miss Grace." Something in his tone made Katherine look up and meet his gaze. There was compassion there, but something else too, a spark of connection that surprised her. She quickly looked away, attributing the flutter in her stomach to exhaustion and the trauma of the day. "Thank you," she said softly. "I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness." "You can start by getting some rest," Sarah said, helping Katherine to her feet. "I'll show you to your room and find you some dry clothes." As Sarah led her toward the back of the house, Katherine glanced back over her shoulder to find Xavier still watching her, his expression thoughtful. She offered a small smile of gratitude, and he nodded in acknowledgement, a gesture that somehow felt like a promise. The spare bedroom was small but clean, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a simple dresser, and a washstand. Sarah provided a nightgown and promised to help Katherine wash her dress in the morning. Left alone, Katherine sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the day crashing over her in waves. She had come so close to death, saved by the timely arrival of a stranger who now offered shelter without question. Tears of relief and lingering fear spilled down her cheeks as she changed into the borrowed nightgown and crawled beneath the warm quilt. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came fitfully, interrupted by dreams of ropes and rain and piercing blue eyes that seemed to follow her even into unconsciousness. Morning brought pale sunlight streaming through the small window. For a moment, Katherine was disoriented, the unfamiliar room confusing her until the memories of the previous day flooded back. Her wrists still stung, though the salve Sarah had applied had reduced the angry redness. A soft knock at the door preceded Sarah's entrance with a basin of warm water and a simple but clean dress draped over her arm. "Good morning," she greeted warmly. "I thought you might need this. It's one of mine might be a bit short on you, but it should do for now." "You're too kind," Katherine said sincerely, accepting the offerings. "The men are already out seeing to the cattle, but breakfast is waiting when you're ready," Sarah informed her, then hesitated. Katherine, James, and Xavier were talking about riding into town today to speak with Harmon about what happened. Alarm flashed through Katherine. No, they mustn't. The sheriff has the town's support. He could make trouble for them for all of you. Sarah's expression was sympathetic but determined. They understand the risk, but men like Harmon don't stop unless someone stands against them. Besides, she added with a small smile, you haven't seen my husband and his brother when their minds are set on something. Especially Xavier. He's got a strong sense of justice, always has, even as a boy. After Sarah left, Katherine washed and dressed quickly, her thoughts churning with worry about what the day might bring. The borrowed dress was indeed a bit short, ending just above her ankles, but it was clean and comfortable. In the kitchen, she found Sarah kneading dough at a large wooden table. The smell of coffee and bacon lingered in the air, creating a homey atmosphere that seemed at odds with Katherine's inner turmoil. "Sit, eat," Sarah urged, gesturing to a plate kept warm near the stove. "You need your strength." Katherine obliged, suddenly realizing how hungry she was after barely eating the day before. Between bites, she asked, "Have you known Xavier long?" Sarah laughed softly. "Since we were children. I grew up on the neighboring ranch before marrying James 5 years ago." Xavier was always the restless one, always looking beyond the horizon. This is the first time he stayed in one place for more than a few months since he was 18. "What changed?" Katherine couldn't help asking. "James needs him," Sarah said simply. "Our foreman died last winter, and with the new cattle we've purchased, it's too much for one man to manage. Besides," she added with a knowing look, "I think Zav's finally tired of drifting. 32 is a fair age to start putting down roots." Katherine nodded, processing this information. 9 years her senior, but not an insurmountable difference. The thought startled her. Why should she be calculating their age difference at all? She quickly redirected her thoughts. "What can I do to help around the house?" she asked. Sarah smiled appreciatively. "There's always plenty to do on a ranch. For now, you can help me with these loaves if you're feeling up to it." The physical activity of kneading dough was soothing, giving Katherine's hands something to do while her mind continued to worry about the O'Malley brothers' confrontation with Sheriff Harmon. She was just placing the shaped loaves near the stove to rise when the sound of horses approaching drew both women to the window. Xavier and James dismounted in the yard, their expressions grim as they headed toward the house. Katherine's heart sank clearly. Things hadn't gone well. "What happened?" Sarah asked as soon as they entered, moving to pour them both coffee. James accepted his cup with a nod of thanks. "Harmon's claiming Miss Grace not only stole the brooch but attacked Mrs. Billings when confronted. He's put out word that she's a fugitive from justice." Katherine felt the blood drain from her face. "That's absurd. We know," Xavier interrupted, his voice gentle despite the anger evident in his tense posture. "We also found out you're not his first victim. The blacksmith's daughter had similar troubles with him last year, had to leave town to escape his attention." "Did you speak with Mrs. Billings?" Katherine asked hopefully. James shook his head. "She's conveniently visiting her sister in Cheyenne. Won't be back for a week, according to her husband." "I need to clear my name," Katherine insisted. "I can't hide here forever." "You won't have to," Xavier assured her, his eyes meeting hers with such confidence that she almost believed him. "I stopped by the general store while James was asking around about Harmon. The storekeeper's wife mentioned seeing Mrs. Billings drop something small and shiny near the dress display when she visited last week. She thought Mrs. Billings had retrieved it, but—" "You think it might be the brooch?" Sarah asked, catching on quickly. Xavier nodded. "Worth checking, at least." "I'm heading back tomorrow morning to look around the store. If we find it, that undermines Harmon's entire case." Katherine felt a spark of hope, quickly tempered by reality. "Even if we find it, it would be my word against his about the other matter." A muscle worked in Xavier's jaw. "One battle at a time, Miss Grace." That evening, after a simple but hearty dinner, Katherine found herself alone with Xavier on the porch. James and Sarah had retired early, leaving them with mugs of coffee and the vast canopy of stars overhead. The storm had cleared completely, leaving the air fresh and cool. "Thank you," Katherine said softly, breaking the comfortable silence. "Not just for rescuing me, but for believing me." Xavier leaned against the porch railing, studying her in the dim light. "Some things you just know," he replied. "I've met men like Harmon before, men who use their position to prey on those they see as vulnerable. I've never felt so helpless," she admitted, wrapping her hands tightly around her mug. "Standing there in that storm, I kept thinking about everything I'd left behind in Boston, my parents, my comfortable life, all to chase some romantic notion of independence in the West." "You regret coming?" Xavier asked. Katherine considered the question seriously. "No," she finally answered. "Despite everything, no. There's a freedom here I never had in Boston, where my entire life was planned out for me, whom I would marry, where I would live, what was considered proper for a woman of my station." She smiled wryly. "Though I doubt my parents envisioned their daughter accused of theft and tied to a post in a thunderstorm." Xavier chuckled, the sound warm and unexpectedly pleasant. "Life has a way of surprising us." "What about you?" Katherine asked, genuinely curious. "Sarah mentioned you've been drifting for years. What made you decide to stay now?" He gazed out at the darkness, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I've seen a lot of country, worked plenty of ranches and cattle drives. There's beauty in that life, freedom, like you said. But there comes a point when you want something that lasts." He turned back to her with a half-smile. "James wrote that he needed help, but I think we both know it was more than that. He was offering me a home, a future, something I've been avoiding for too long." "Why avoid it?" Katherine asked softly. Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "Our father wasn't a good man," he finally said. "Drank too much, used his fists too freely. James stayed and fought his battles here, made this place his own after father died. I ran." The admission seemed to cost him something. "Sometimes I wonder if I was brave or just a coward, taking the easier path." "There's nothing cowardly about protecting yourself," Katherine said firmly. "We all have different ways of surviving." His eyes met hers, filled with a warmth that made her breath catch. "You're an unusual woman, Katherine Grace." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the intimacy of it hung between them like a tangible thing. Katherine felt her cheeks warm, grateful for the darkness that hid her reaction. "I should get some rest," she said, rising from her chair. "Tomorrow will be an important day." Xavier nodded, straightening as well. "I'll ride into town at first light. With luck, I'll return with proof of your innocence. And if there's no proof to find," she couldn't help asking, his expression grew serious, "then we'll find another way. I won't let Harmon win, that's a promise." As Katherine lay in bed that night, she replayed their conversation in her mind. There was something about Xavier O'Malley that affected her in ways she hadn't experienced before, a feeling of safety combined with an unexpected flutter of attraction. It was foolish, she knew, to develop feelings for a man she barely knew, especially while her future remained so uncertain. Yet she couldn't deny the connection forming between them, as natural as breathing. Morning came with a soft pink glow on the horizon. Katherine had risen early, hoping to see Xavier before he left for town, but he had already gone. Sarah found her at the kitchen window, gazing out at the trail leading toward Hillsborough. "He'll be careful," Sarah assured her, correctly interpreting her concern. "Xavier may be impulsive sometimes, but he's not reckless." Katherine turned away from the window, embarrassed at being so transparent. "I hardly know him," she said, as much to herself as to Sarah. "Yet I feel responsible for the danger he's putting himself in." Sarah's smile was knowing. "Some connections don't need time to form. When I first met James, I knew within a week that he would be important to me. It scared me half to death." "I didn't say," Katherine began, flustered. "You didn't have to," Sarah replied kindly. "Now, would you help me gather eggs? The chickens have been laying well, and I'm thinking of baking a custard for dessert tonight." The day passed slowly, filled with domestic tasks that Katherine tackled with determination, grateful for the distraction. By late afternoon, there was still no sign of Xavier, and her worry had grown to genuine fear. "He should have been back by now," she said to James as he came in from the fields for a late lunch. James checked his pocket watch with a frown. "It's a fair ride each way, and he may have needed time to search properly or talk to people in town. If he's not back by sunset, I'll ride in after him." But sunset came and went with no sign of Xavier. True to his word, James saddled his horse despite Sarah's obvious concern. "I want to come with you," Katherine insisted, already reaching for a shawl. James shook his head firmly. "It's too dangerous. If Harmon sees you, he'll arrest you on the spot or worse." "It's my fault Xavier's in trouble," Katherine argued. "I can't just wait here not knowing." "Actually," Sarah interrupted, "I think Katherine should go." When both James and Katherine looked at her in surprise, she continued, "If there's trouble, two of you searching will be more effective than one. And Katherine knows exactly what the brooch looks like, which could be important." James hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Stay close to me at all times," he instructed Katherine. "And keep your hat low. I'll find you something to wear that makes you less recognizable." 20 minutes later, Katherine sat astride a gentle mare named Daisy, dressed in an old shirt and trousers of James's that Sarah had hastily altered, with her hair tucked beneath a wide-brimmed hat. The clothes were too large, but in the darkness, she might pass for a young ranch hand at first glance. The ride to Hillsborough was tense and largely silent. James's concern for his brother was palpable, and Katherine's own fears grew with each passing mile. What if Xavier had been arrested? What if Harmon had done something worse? The town was quiet when they arrived. Most businesses closed for the night except the saloon, which spilled light and raucous noise onto the main street. James led them to the hitching post outside the general store, which stood dark and shuttered. "The storekeeper lives upstairs," James explained in a low voice. "We'll start there." Before they could dismount, however, the saloon doors banged open, and a familiar figure stumbled out, Sheriff Harmon himself. clearly intoxicated and arguing loudly with someone still inside. Katherine instinctively shrank back into the shadows, heart pounding. "He doesn't look like a man who's captured a fugitive," James observed quietly. "That's something, at least." They waited until Harmon had staggered down the street toward the sheriff's office before approaching the store. James knocked firmly on the side door that led to the upstairs residence. After a moment, a light appeared and the door cracked open to reveal a wary-looking older man with spectacles perched on his nose. "Who's there?" "Mr. Peterson, it's James O'Malley. I'm looking for my brother Xavier. He rode into town this morning and hasn't returned." Recognition flickered across the storekeeper's face, followed by concern. He opened the door wider. "You'd better come in," he said, glancing nervously up and down the street. Once inside, Katherine removed her hat, earning a surprised look from Mr. Peterson. "You're the school teacher," he said. "The one Harmon's been looking for." "She's innocent," James stated firmly. "Xavier came to town to look for proof a brooch Mrs. Billings may have dropped in your store." Mr. Peterson sighed heavily. "Your brother was here this morning. I let him search the store, and sure enough, he found the brooch wedged between two display cases. But before he could leave, Harmon spotted him through the window and came in demanding to know what he was doing." Katherine's stomach clenched with dread. "What happened?" they argued. "Xavier showed him the brooch, said it proved you hadn't stolen anything. Harmon—" The storekeeper hesitated. "Harmon didn't take it well. Said finding it didn't prove you hadn't taken it first and then hidden it in my store." Things got heated. Xavier struck him when Harmon suggested you'd earned special favors from him. James cursed under his breath. "Where is my brother now?" "Jail," Mr. Peterson said grimly. "Harmon arrested him for assaulting an officer, said he'd be lucky not to hang for it." Katherine felt as though the floor had dropped from beneath her feet. Xavier was in jail, might even face hanging because of her. "We have to help him," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite her inner turmoil. "Harmon's drunk now," Mr. Peterson offered. "Been at the saloon most of the evening. The jail's likely unattended." James nodded decisively. "Katherine, stay here with Mr. Peterson. I'll go get Xavier." "No," Katherine said firmly. "I'm coming with you. This is my fight, too." The storekeeper cleared his throat. "If I might make a suggestion, the jail's around back of the sheriff's office. There's a window that's not barred, too small for most men to fit through, but perhaps the young lady." James looked at Katherine appraisingly. "It's risky." "I'll do it," she said without hesitation. Mr. Peterson insisted on accompanying them, bringing along a lantern and, to Katherine's surprise, a small revolver he tucked into his waistband. "Been in this town 30 years, he explained quietly as they slipped out the back way. "Harmon's only been sheriff for 2, and he's the worst we've had. Not the first time he's abused his position, especially with young women." They made their way through the dark alleys behind the businesses, staying in the shadows. The sheriff's office and adjoining jail were set slightly apart from other buildings, with a small yard behind them enclosed by a low fence. "There," Mr. Peterson whispered, pointing to a window near the ground level of the jail. "That leads to the cell area. The locking mechanism for the cells is simple, just a lever on the wall." James studied the window. "It is small, but I think you can fit through," he told Katherine. "I'll lift you up." Nerves fluttered in Katherine's stomach, but determination pushed her forward. They crept to the window, and James cupped his hands to give her a boost. The window was indeed small, but Katherine was slender, and with some maneuvering, she managed to slip through head first, landing as quietly as possible on the dirt floor inside. The jail was dark and smelled of stale whiskey and unwashed bodies. As her eyes adjusted, she made out 2 cells along one wall. The first was empty, but in the second, "Xavier," she whispered, moving quickly to the bars. A figure stirred on the narrow cot, then sat up abruptly. "Katherine." Xavier's voice was rough with disbelief. "What in God's name are you doing here?" She pressed against the bars, relief flooding through her at the sight of him. In the dim light filtering through the window, she could see a darkening bruise on his jaw and a cut above his eye, but he was alive and alert. "Rescuing you," she replied, forcing lightness into her tone as she located the lever Mr. Peterson had mentioned. It took all her strength to pull it down, but with a loud clank that made them both wince, the cell door swung open. Xavier was on his feet immediately, crossing to her in 2 long strides. For a moment, Katherine thought he might embrace her, but he stopped short, his eyes scanning her unusual attire with a mixture of amusement and concern. "James is outside with Mr. Peterson," she explained quickly. "We need to go. Now." Xavier nodded, but before they could move toward the window, the door leading from the sheriff's office burst open and Sheriff Harmon himself stood swaying in the doorway, gun drawn. "Well, well," he slurred, his bloodshot eyes fixing on Katherine with malevolent recognition despite her disguise. "Look who decided to return to the scene of her crimes." Xavier moved instinctively, placing himself between Katherine and the sheriff's weapon. "Lower your gun, Harmon. It's over. Peterson found the brooch in his store right where Mrs. Billings dropped it. There was never any theft." "Doesn't matter," Harmon spat. "Still got you for assault. And now I've got her for jailbreak. Might have to shoot you both while you're trying to escape," he added with an ugly grin. Katherine's heart raced, but she forced herself to stand tall beside Xavier. "You won't get away with this," she said, proud that her voice didn't tremble. "There are witnesses who know we're here." Harmon laughed unpleasantly. "Who's gonna take the word of an outsider and a storekeeper over the sheriff? This is my town." "Not anymore, it isn't," came a new voice from the doorway behind Harmon. The sheriff whirled, nearly losing his balance, to find himself facing not just James and Mr. Peterson but several other townsmen, including the blacksmith and the owner of the saloon. "What's this?" Harmon demanded, his gun hand wavering uncertainly between the newcomers and his prisoners. The blacksmith, a mountain of a man with massive arms, stepped forward. "Mr. Peterson fetched us while the O'Malleys were distracting you. We've had enough, Harmon. Enough of your bullying, your corruption, and especially your treatment of women, including my daughter last year." "You can't," Harmon began. "We can and we are," the saloon owner interrupted firmly. "We're relieving you of your duties, effective immediately. Hand over your badge and gun before you hurt someone." For a tense moment, Katherine thought Harmon might start shooting, but faced with so many determined faces, his courage failed him. With a muttered curse, he tossed his badge to the floor, though he kept his gun. "You'll regret this," he threatened as he backed toward the rear exit. "All of you." "The only regret around here is that we didn't do this sooner," the blacksmith replied evenly. "Now get out of our town, Harmon. There's a stage leaving for Denver tomorrow morning. Be on it, or face charges yourself." With a final venomous glare at Katherine and Xavier, Harmon stumbled out the back door and disappeared into the night. The tension in the room broke, and suddenly, Katherine found herself being introduced to half a dozen of Hillsborough's leading citizens, all of whom apologized profusely for believing the worst of her. The blacksmith's wife even embraced her, tears in her eyes as she explained how her own daughter had suffered similar accusations before fleeing town. "You'll have your teaching position back, of course," Mr. Peterson assured her. "The children have been missing you terribly." Through it all, Xavier remained close to her side, his presence steady and reassuring. When the impromptu gathering finally broke up with promises to meet again the next day to elect a temporary sheriff, he placed a gentle hand at the small of her back as they walked toward where their horses waited. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly, his eyes searching her face with concern. Katherine nodded, suddenly exhausted now that the danger had passed. Just tired and relieved. She looked up at him, noting again the injuries to his face. "What about you? He hurt you?" Xavier's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "I've had worse in barroom brawls. Though I have to admit, being rescued by a schoolteacher in borrowed trousers is a new experience." The unexpected humor broke through Katherine's fatigue, and she laughed softly. "I'm full of surprises, Mr. O'Malley." "So I'm discovering, Miss Grace," he replied, his voice warm in a way that sent pleasant shivers down her spine. The ride back to the ranch was considerably lighter in spirit than their journey into town had been. James rode ahead, eager to tell Sarah the good news, while Xavier and Katherine followed at a more leisurely pace, their horses walking side by side under the vast canopy of stars. "What will you do now?" Xavier asked after a comfortable silence. "Return to teaching in Hillsborough." Katherine considered the question. "I think so. It's what I came west to do after all, and after tonight I feel like I might actually belong there." She glanced at him. "What about you? Still planning to put down roots at the ranch?" "More than ever," he replied, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I'm finding compelling reasons to stay." The implication hung between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly but both aware of its presence. By unspoken agreement, they allowed the conversation to drift to lighter topics for the remainder of the ride, sharing stories of their childhoods and discoveries about each other's characters. By the time they reached the ranch, Katherine felt as though she'd known Xavier for years rather than days. There was an ease between them that defied explanation, a natural understanding that required few words. Sarah was waiting up for them, relief evident in her face as she hugged them both. After a quick retelling of the night's events, they all retired to their rooms, the excitement and strain of the day catching up with them. In the privacy of her borrowed bedroom, Katherine sat on the edge of the bed, running the events of the past few days through her mind. From the terror of being left to die in the storm to the triumph of helping free Xavier from jail, it had been a journey of extremes. And through it all, a connection had formed with the man who had cut her free from that post, a connection she could no longer pretend was merely gratitude. The following week passed in a flurry of activity. Katherine returned to her teaching position in Hillsborough, welcomed back by enthusiastic students and apologetic parents. Mrs. Billings returned from Cheyenne to discover the truth about her missing brooch and offered a mortified apology. Harmon, true to the ultimatum, had boarded the stage to Denver and was reportedly continuing farther west, away from his disgrace. Through it all, Xavier found reasons to ride into town almost daily, delivering supplies to the general store, meeting with the new sheriff, the blacksmith's brother-in-law, a fair-minded former Army sergeant, or simply stopping by the schoolhouse to escort Katherine back to the ranch, where she continued to stay while looking for more permanent accommodations. It was during one such ride home, about 10 days after the confrontation with Harmon, that Xavier guided their horses off the main trail toward a small rise overlooking a creek lined with cottonwoods. "I want to show you something," he explained, dismounting and helping her down from her mare. The spot was beautiful, with the late afternoon sun filtering through the leaves and glinting off the clear water below. A gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and the distant lowing of cattle. "This is lovely," Katherine said, turning slowly to take in the view. "Do you come here often?" Xavier nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's always been my favorite place on the ranch. Even as a boy, I'd come here when I needed to think or get away from." He trailed off, but Katherine understood what remained unsaid. "From your father," she finished gently. Yes. He moved closer to her, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. Katherine, there's something I've been wanting to say to you. She found herself holding her breath, suddenly very aware of his proximity and the privacy of their surroundings. Yes. These past days, getting to know you. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. I know it hasn't been long, but I feel a connection with you that I've never experienced before. You're brave and kind and smarter than anyone I've ever met. And beautiful, he added softly, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. Katherine leaned slightly into his touch, her voice barely above a whisper when she replied, I feel it too. This connection. It should seem impossible after such a short time, but some things you just know, Xavier said, echoing his words from that night on the porch. His hand moved to cup her cheek, thumb gently stroking her skin. I'd like to court you properly, Katherine Grace, if you'll allow it. Instead of answering with words, Katherine rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his in a kiss that started tentatively but quickly deepened as Xavier's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, she smiled up at him. I'll take that as a yes, he murmured, his eyes crinkling at the corners with happiness. Definitely yes, she confirmed, her heart lighter than it had been in years. They lingered by the creek until the sun began to set, talking about their hopes and plans, sharing more kisses, and building the foundation of something that both sensed would last a lifetime. As summer turned to autumn, Katherine relocated to a small house near the school that the town council provided as part of her teaching salary. Xavier courted her openly and properly, with flowers and dinners and long rides across the Wyoming countryside. Their courtship became the talk of Hillsborough, but in a way that warmed rather than concerned Katherine the genuine happiness of a community that had come to embrace her as one of their own. On a crisp October evening, exactly 6 months after Xavier had cut her free from that post during the thunderstorm, he proposed properly with his grandmother's ring. They were at their special spot by the creek, the cottonwoods now ablaze with golden leaves. You saved my life, Katherine told him after accepting with tears of joy in her eyes. Not just from the storm, but from a life half lived. I came west seeking independence, but I found something even more precious: love and belonging. We saved each other, Xavier corrected gently, pressing his forehead to hers. I was drifting without purpose until I found you. Now I have roots deeper than I ever imagined possible. They married in November, with the entire town turning out for the celebration. Sarah, now visibly expecting her and James's first child, stood as Katherine's matron of honor, while James proudly served as his brother's best man. After a brief honeymoon in Denver, they returned to Hillsborough to begin their life together. Xavier continued working with James at the ranch, while starting construction on their own home, a comfortable house halfway between the ranch and town, allowing Katherine to continue teaching while Xavier managed his portion of the growing O'Malley cattle operation. By the following spring, Katherine had news of her own to share. On the anniversary of their first meeting, she led Xavier to their spot by the creek and placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "Really?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion as understanding dawned in his eyes. She nodded, her own eyes shimmering with happy tears. "Our family is beginning, Xavier, a new life born from that stormy day when you found me." His answering kiss was tender and reverent, full of promises for their future together. 12 years later, the O'Malley home was filled with the joyful chaos of family life. 10-year-old Thomas, their firstborn, had his father's blue eyes and his mother's quick mind. 8-year-old twins Alina and Elizabeth inherited Xavier's dark hair and Katherine's gentle spirit. And 4-year-old Michael, their youngest, was a perfect blend of both parents in looks and temperament. Katherine had eventually given up formal teaching to focus on their growing family, though she still tutored children from outlying ranches and had started a small lending library in a corner of the general store, now owned by Mr. Peterson's son. Xavier and James had expanded their cattle operation to become one of the most successful in the county, known for fair dealings and quality stock. The brothers worked well together, their different strengths complementing each other perfectly. On the anniversary of their meeting a date they still celebrated each year, Xavier surprised Katherine by taking her to their special spot by the creek. A picnic basket was already waiting, along with a small wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked as he handed her the gift. "Open it and see," he encouraged, his expression a mix of tenderness and excitement. Inside, she found a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the soft leather. "Look inside," Xavier prompted. Katherine opened the journal to find Xavier's handwriting on the first page. "For Katherine, my heart's true north. To record our adventures past and those yet to come. With all my love." Xavier, beneath his inscription, was a pressed wildflower, the same variety that had been growing near the post where he'd found her all those years ago. "I thought," he explained as she looked up at him with glistening eyes, "that you might want to write our story. For the children, and their children someday. How a thunderstorm and a desperate situation brought together two souls that were meant to find each other." Katherine leaned across the picnic blanket to kiss him, as much in love now as she had been on their wedding day. "It's perfect," she whispered against his lips. "And so is our story." As they sat together by the creek that had witnessed so many important moments in their relationship, Katherine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the terror of being bound to that post during the storm to the joy of creating a family and a life with the man who had saved her, it had been a path neither could have predicted but both now treasured beyond measure. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sun begin its descent toward the western horizon. Katherine leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "About storms," she replied softly, "and how sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures." Xavier tightened his embrace, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I thank God every day for guiding me to you in that storm." "As do I," Katherine agreed, turning to meet his gaze still as blue and penetrating as the day they'd met. "As do I." In the distance, their children's laughter could be heard as they played near the house under Sarah's watchful eye. The sound floated across the peaceful Wyoming landscape, like music, a symphony of the life they had built together from that fateful stormy beginning. A life of love, challenge, growth, and abiding happiness that neither had dared to imagine on that rain-soaked day 12 years before, when a desperate woman tied to a post and a cowboy with a kind heart discovered that sometimes true love arrives in the most unexpected circumstances. And as the sun set on another anniversary, Katherine and Xavier O'Malley returned to their home and their children, their hands intertwined and their hearts beating in unison, two souls forever grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the love that had sheltered them ever since.